Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go over my go-to IDE for pretty much any language. It's Visual Studio Code. If you ever look up the top IDEs over the past 5 or so years, Visual Studio Code is always on that list and it's usually near the top. I think that's for a number of reasons. It's open source, free, extremely customizable, and packed with features by default. And it's actually lightweight, unlike some other things that claim to be. If you want to download Visual Studio Code, there's a link in the description. You can go ahead and download that. It's from Microsoft, so you can trust it. All right, let's go through creating a simple project using Visual Studio Code, just in Python. All right, so if you first open Visual Studio Code, you'll probably see something like this. That's this welcome page. You can actually go through some walkthroughs to understand how things work for different, for like a bunch of different things, like just the fundamentals of Visual Studio Code. If you want to do Java, Python, a bunch of different stuff with it, it's pretty awesome. There's some good walkthroughs, so I'd highly recommend some of those. But let's go ahead and create our own project. So one thing that I really like with Visual Studio Code is that everything is over here on the left with the Explorer, Search, Run and Debug, and extensions. We'll kind of go over a lot of these throughout this video. So firstly, if you go to Explorer and you haven't selected anything yet, you can open a folder, which is really awesome because if you open a folder, then you have all of the files within that folder and subfolders available to you. So let's go ahead and open a folder. But when we do this, we're actually going to create a folder and then add it there. So we're going to go over to my dev and let's got a lot of things in here. And we'll just do like VS Code example. All right, and then we'll select folder, and that then opens this here, and you can see we have nothing there. It says there's a Git repository because this is within my Python repository, which has a bunch of stuff in it, and you've probably seen that before. All right, so we have the folder open. Let's create a couple files. So we'll create like main.py, and within here, and you can just do that by right-clicking and clicking new file or doing Control-N. And let's just print hello YouTube. And I guess this should be a capital. There we go. Okay, cool. And then let's go ahead and create another file, test.py, print tests are fun. All right, great. So one thing that's neat is that when you have nothing selected, it will show you some of these things here, which actually are a lot of the things I actually use. So first off, if you do Control P, you can switch between files. So you never really have to leave the keyboard, which is really handy. So if you want to, jump between files, and I'm fairly certain that the last file that you actually use. So if we go here, the last file is always if you just Control P down, that will be the last one. So you can kind of just, always go back and forth, which is super handy. But another thing you can do which is kind of suggested here, is this Control-Shift-P for all commands. You can actually get to this too if you just do Control-P and then do the forward, the greater than symbol, I guess. And this is called the command palette. And it allows you to basically run a bunch of different types of commands within Visual Studio Code. This is not a clean install, by the way, so if you're following along, you're probably not going to see all the things that I have here, but we'll get into why very shortly. All right, so I'm going to just create my simple program here where subscribe is true, and if you subscribe, then I say thank you, you're awesome, and if not, it says it's okay, you're still awesome. So what if we want to run this file? Well, there's actually a few different ways you can do that. The main way that I actually tend to do this is I open up a terminal within Visual Studio Code. In order to do that, you can press Control tilde, or the one to the left of the one. And if you do that, it opens up a terminal already in your folder, which is really handy. And then you can just go ahead and type out Python 3 and then main.py and run it. And it says, thank you, you're awesome, because subscribe is true. If you want to subscribe, now's a great time to do it. Another way you can run your code is actually through this button right up here, this run Python file. Or just a shortcut is just pressing F5. And if you do this, first off, you get to pick which debugger you would like, and Python debugger if you install Python, which again we'll get to in a second. Then you can say the Python file with arguments, and a bunch of other stuff. We're just going to do Python file. And then when it runs, it does a couple things down here. And there we go. It ran, and there's our output right here. Now, it will remember what we had selected previously. So if we just press F5 again, it will just run it right again. And you might notice that it takes a little bit of time to run. And the reason for that is because when you press F5, it's not just running the Python file, it's also debugging the Python file. So one reason you might actually want to debug the Python file is because you can then add breakpoints. If you've never used breakpoints, they're going to seem like magic right here. But what breakpoints allow you to do is pause the execution of your code. So if we click right here, by the way, most IDEs support this, but if we click right here and we go ahead and press F5 again, then we will see that it actually stops here. And over on the left, we can see variables and what their values are. We can see global variables, which are just these ones here. And then any variables that you have watched that aren't necessarily directly here, but you can kind of see what values are, just a little handy thing you can do. You don't necessarily need to do it. It'll also show the call stack. So if you've called into multiple functions, you can see which function you've called, what line, and where, and whatnot. And then you can also make it so that breakpoints will automatically be created if like an exception was thrown, if etc., uncaught exceptions, and a bunch of things like that. And this is only for when you're running in debug mode. But then you can go ahead and like step over lines and go line per line, or you can just press F5 again to continue. And then it will go ahead and finish running. Super useful if you're trying to debug something. So another way you can actually run this file, which is very similar to what we're doing here, is by doing Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on your Mac and type debug to cursor. And if you do this, it'll run to your cursor, wherever your cursor is, and then you can go ahead and run this, and it will create a breakpoint there for you automatically. In this case, we're not actually going to get to that breakpoint, but let me just kind of show that again real quick, where we can have our cursor up here. We can go ahead and run debug to cursor, and you'll actually see that it actually maintains the history that you have here. So you don't have to keep doing it, like trying to search for it again, but it will go ahead and create a breakpoint right there for you. So pretty awesome. All right, so we've kind of gone like through writing a bit of code. We've gone through running your code, debugging, because again, the debugger is super, super useful. And again, that's just this little tab right over here. But what if you want to search things in your code? Well, you can search all of your code just by clicking this little search or doing Control-Shift-F, and then that will go ahead and search any code. So if we want to see like sub, then we can search and it will show you each line there. And of course, if you click it, it will go to the file. If we're not in the file, oops. If we're not in the file, we can go ahead and click it and it will open it for us. So again, searching in most IDEs, but pretty darn useful. All right, let's talk about the next tab down, extensions. So this is how you can like supercharge Visual Studio Code or VS Code. There are thousands and thousands of extensions. So if you want like a Python formatter, you can search for this. And sure enough, the block formatter, which is one of the most common ones, you can go ahead and download there. They're all rated, and they have like show you the number of installs, so you can kind of, see if there's something you want or not. So I would highly recommend checking out some of these. I will say that eventually, if you have like hundreds of these, you might end up slowing down Visual Studio Code because it's got to run all these other extensions. But by default, you don't really need too many. If you are just using Python though, you're probably going to want the Python extension, which is just made by Microsoft. It has 116 million downloads, so it's pretty good. And there's even groups. So for instance, this one where they have Python, they have Jupyter, and then they have this Python type hint. And you can go to them and they're just listings, and you can go ahead and see like what they're going to do. So in this case, it's going to help you understand how you can kind of specify input or parameter types and whatnot. So yeah, pretty awesome. Even as we just saw here, if we go back to this, Jupyter is an option. So if you want to have Jupyter notebooks within Visual Studio Code, you can do that. So if we go here, we just do create new Jupyter notebook. There you go. You have a Jupyter notebook, which is a really, really handy to write code and kind of like test code out because it maintains a lot of things. So I actually have a whole other video on Jupyter, so you should definitely go check that out right up here if you're interested. but it's a great way to write code, and you can do it straight from Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio is another thing. Visual Studio Code is the one we're talking about. You can even have Git integration. So if we go ahead and search for Git here, you can see like these graphs and a bunch of different things that you can get, like Git history, Git lens, which is one that I have installed. I just opened up the Python folder here, which we have a bunch of things within, and you can actually do a lot of your Git stuff from directly within here. So you can go ahead and click Python down here, or this main, and you can go ahead and see what branch you're on. You can check out branches, you can create new branches. You can even install extensions that allow you to see more things. So for instance, I don't know why this one is not, oh, there we go, enable. If we go ahead and enable this, we can go down and see like Git lens, and it will show you a bunch of different things you can do. So we can commit a bunch of files if we want to. So it's really awesome. You can kind of do a lot of really powerful stuff, and you can, see all of your commits and whatnot. So if you do use a lot of things with Git, I would highly recommend like installing something like that, because source control is way easier when you have a UI for it. So definitely check that out. All right, customization. You probably thought we've already gone over customization, but you can even customize more. So if you do control comma, which you show here, which is showing settings, you can see settings for anything that you ever want to really do. So in this case, you can change like keyboard shortcuts, or like really anything, even extensions, like if specific rules for different extensions and whatnot, you can all configure it within here, and it's actually saved to your user. So if you create a user and save it within Visual Studio Code, then the next time you open Visual Studio Code in another computer and you're logged in, it'll sync all of that for you, and that's pretty darn great. So one thing that I haven't actually mentioned here is how do you change different environment things? So down here on the bottom left, again, is like Git control. Then over here, you have a way to visualize your commits, which is this thing here. If you have Git lens installed, then you can see some warnings. And the next thing over is ports forwarded, again, related to different things that I have installed. But really important over on the right side is things that are kind of native to Visual Studio Code. So if you go ahead and click this, it allows you to go to any line or anything like that. And the shortcut for this is actually Control G. And then if you want to go to like line 25, it will just bring you right there. Pretty handy. The next thing is, how do you want indentation to work? So spaces. So you can indent using spaces. You can indent doing tabs. I know that's a pretty hot topic. So let me know, actually, what do you prefer, spaces or tabs when you press tab? I actually don't even know what I have. I think I'm spaces, right? Yeah, I'm a spaces guy, but I change from time to time. The next thing is the encoding. So you can encode it so that it saves with different types of thing. UTF-8 is just kind of the default, I think. End of line sequences, you're probably not going to change that, but you can. And Python, which is, looks like we skipped one right here, type checking, and then Python, which is basically what is the type of file that you have open, and it's interpreting it as though it is a Python file, which it is. So that's good. And then the next thing, which a lot of people don't actually realize, but is super handy, is how you can specify what version of Python you're using. So this is specifically for cases where you're going to be debugging or running your code through Visual Studio, not if you're doing it through like the command line or anything like that, because you're specifying it when you use it in the command line. But if you are pressing F5 or debugging or anything like that, then you're going to want to set which Python version you are going to be using. So you can go ahead and click this, and here you can enter the path, so you can just basically see any of the Python versions you have installed on your computer most likely, and just pick which one you want. Another thing that I honestly don't use too much, because I read a lot of my code just myself, but you can actually even collaborate, almost like Google Docs, within Visual Studio Code. So there's an extension for this called Live Share. And if you go ahead and search this and install this, again, it's by Microsoft, you can, once you install this, it'll just take a second. Once you've done this, there's this little live share button down at the bottom. And if you click this, you can basically start this collaboration session and make it read-only or whatnot, and basically send links to people to be able to join your session and code right with you. So it's really awesome that you can do that, and it's so easy to do, which is, again, pretty sweet. So these are just some of the reasons that I really like Visual Studio Code. You can kind of use it for any language. It's really lightweight. It's really fast, and it has basically all the features that I really need. If you have a different IDE that's your favorite, let me know in the comments down below, because I'd love to check some of them out. I think like while I do use Visual Studio most of the time, or like 99% of the time probably, it's fun to see what else is out there, preferably free ones, because again, this is free, which, considering how feature packed it is, that's pretty awesome. If I've forgotten any of the reasons that I like Visual Studio Code, I'll be sure to drop them in the comments down below, so feel free to look there, and maybe I'll have an updated comment with other things that I have forgotten. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please drop a like and subscribe down below, and I will see you in the next one. But remember, I'm Jake, you're awesome, and this has been Visual Studio Code. Cheers.